Thank you, Don. So the first thing you'll notice is that it's not average to amazing. After listening to Michael Landsberg's presentation, I went with screw average, create amazing. And I think I could probably even taken it further after listening to some of the language that our friend Mr. Landsberg used. So I want to start by asking you a question. Think about a hero that you had growing up. Each of us had one. Someone who that you really looked up to. Perhaps it was a musician, a sports star, or perhaps an uncle or a teacher. For me, it was the great one, number 99, Wayne Gretzky. And I admired him for everything that he did on the ice and off the ice. And he was anything but average. He truly was amazing. So whoever you thought of from your youth, there's no doubt that your hero had something about them that made them amazing too. The theme of the conference is, does anyone know what the theme of the conference is? Excellence. Commit to excellence, exactly. You're the president of the organization. I'm glad that you answered. We both know that excellence cannot occur without action. And so there's nothing I can tell you today that's going to do you any good. Unless, of course, there's some action. So what I'd like to do here is I'm going to share with you what it's going to take to get really, really good at what it is that you do. Let me ask you another question. How happy are you with your career? I'll share with you what is happening across the country. 47% of Canadians aren't happy in their work, according to the Huffington Post. Canada ranks 17th out of 35 countries that Indeed, the job aggregator, every year they do a job happiness survey. And Canada is smack dab in the middle at number 17. Employee engagement has been stagnant since 2010, and in many cases declining. So employee engagement typically is 5 questions that segments folks into 5 categories of fully engaged, moderately engaged, under-engaged, or disengaged. And you ask questions such as, how willing are you to refer your organization to people around you? How inspired are you to give extra effort? The pride you feel working for the organization, your sense of future at the organization, and your intent to stay a long time. I don't know about you, but that does not seem very inspiring. And so I want you to imagine for a second, in your career, where are you going? Imagine that you and I are in this airplane. We're at YVR, you've got the North Shore Mountains in the background, and we're going to be going on a flight. We taxi out on the tarmac, the pilot hits the jets, and we fire down the runway. We spend 10 hours in the airplane, the pilot comes back on, we start to go for our descent, and we arrive at a location unknown to either one of us. We disembark the plane, and you got to figure out, where the heck am I? So you look for a sign, you see one off in the distance, you can't read it, so you decide you're going to get a little bit closer, and you realize, I have no idea what language that sign is in. So you mosey on over to one of the clerks at a desk, you start to engage in conversation to ask him, where are we? And he completely ignores you, keeps his head down, and continues on. You ask somebody else. You soon realize you have no idea where you are, you have no idea what the language is, and you don't know how to navigate. Well, that's an analogy for how many folks feel when they get to a point in their career where they're between jobs, or they've been at an organization for a while, they want to make a change, and they don't know how. So some of the things that I'm going to talk to us about today are the language of career management, understanding the language of career management, because there's a number of things that you need to know and do in order to be able to navigate the job market. So Don mentioned to you that I've been in the recruitment business for almost 20 years. And in those 20 years, I've had the interesting perspective of being able to deal with people when they're at that little slice in time between roles. Either by choice or by desire, they've made a decision that they want to move on. Sometimes it's into a different role in their own organization, and sometimes it's outside of the organization. And so I've been able to see a lot of things that work and things that don't work. And I've tried to aggregate those and package them for you today so that you can take some of those things and hopefully there's a tidbit in here somewhere that helps you perform better in your role, make better decisions as it pertains to your career. So, unlike all of you, I'm not much of a numbers guy. I'm a concept guy, but this here is something that stuck with me from the moment that I saw it in my stats class at BCIT, the bell curve. Quick reminder, a bell curve basically is a graphical representation, I can't believe I'm saying this, a graphical representation of basically anything. So for example, if we were going to plot out everyone's height in this room, you'd have the shortest people on the left, you'd have the average in the middle, and the tallest people on the right. And we can take that same concept and apply it to career performance. There's some people that perform very, very well. There's some people that don't perform very well at all. They don't stay very long, do they? And so, screw average. Who wants to be average? Our heroes weren't average. Why would we want to be average in our careers? What is it that we need to do to create amazing? And the first thing that we need to do is, like G.I. Joe said, knowing is half the battle. And there's 4 things that I want to share with you that you need to know in order for that to become a possibility for you in your career. At least that's my opinion. So what you need to know to beat the average. There's 4 rules, and I made these up, of career management. I'm going to share those with you. There's a lot of 4s in my presentation. I think that's as high as I can count. Know yourself. So you need to know the rules, you need to know yourself. There's critical questions you need to ask yourself. Know the danger signs, the common problems, and bad advice. There's a lot of bad advice out there, people. You jump on the internet, you read a lot of blogs, some of the stuff just leads you down the wrong path, and you want to avoid it. And you need to know how to recover. Setbacks always happen, and it's something that unless you know how to get back on and continue down the path, it can be debilitating. So number 1 is know the rules. And the first thing is you need to get into the right mindset. Like our friend is here tinkering on his brain and getting himself ready, there's a mindset that we need to be in. And the first thing that we need to do is how we think about work. How do you think about your work? Is it a job or is it a career? And there is a difference between a job and a career. Let's take a look at what some of those differences are. A job mindset is short-term. A career mindset is long-term. A job is reactionary. A career is intentional. You do a job to get by, or you do a job, or you have a career to realize outcomes in your life. A job you have to do, a career you want to. A job feels like work, a career feels engaging. A job is an obligation, and careers are an investment. A job creates money, a career creates money, but it also creates meaning. I trust you guys know who this chap is. Chris Rock. So let's see what Chris Rock has to say about careers and jobs. Well, that ain't going to work. You know what? We're going to try that again. I'm going to put the microphone right down here.
Because there ain't enough time when you got a career. When you got a job, there's too much time.
Well said, Chris. There's more written on jobs, job search technique, how to create a resume, than there is on how to manage a career. Strategically planning for an entire body of work, not just a job. And that's unfortunate. I've said for a long time that the skills required to do your work, depending on what you do, are often different than the skills required to advance your career. And so regardless of what field you're in, accounting and finance, you're in physics, whatever the case is, the skills required to do your job are sometimes different than required to manage your career. We'll talk about what some of those skills are. Thinking takes effort and time. And we've all heard the saying, from an entrepreneurial perspective, that there's a difference between working on your business and working in your business. The same applies to our careers. We spend so much time working in our careers that the idea of working on our careers and planning for and in that mindset of where are we going to go, it sometimes comes by the wayside. And I mean, let's be honest, we all have other things going on in our lives outside of work, but the idea of putting some time and investing in ourselves from that perspective is a good idea. So another way to look at time is to account for time. And so I've got a question for you. This is our first group exercise. What is your career runway? So imagine for a moment, you can either do this mentally or you can draw it on a piece of paper. A line going from one side of the paper to the other. And on the left-hand side of that paper, I want you to write your age, or just think about what your age is. And then on the other side, write 62, or just think of the number 62. Subtract your age from 62. For some of you, that might be in a couple of years. Hooray, good for you, high five. Others, it might be quite a while. For me, it's 21 years. I'm not even halfway through my career. And this is something that can be fairly sobering, not necessarily sobering, but it's an idea that I think a lot of folks don't necessarily realize, especially earlier in their career. You're going to spend a lot of time working. And so underestimating how long you'll be working, I think, is a critical mistake. Because when you realize how long and how much time you're going to be spending working, it underscores the amount of effort that goes into the planning component as opposed to things happening year after year and not necessarily having some intelligent design around what those things might be. So the third rule is change is constant. No surprises there. We know that, especially as healthcare workers, you guys are masters at dealing with change. When you think about all the things that have happened in the healthcare sector over the course of the last 5 years, 10 years, it's amazing. Some of you that have been in healthcare for 30 years have worked for I don't know how many different organizations. You know a lot of the same people, but the shapes of those organizations has changed. The influences of technology and what have you, we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. Let's take a look at the last 10 years just generally, healthcare, but outside of healthcare. If I would have told you 10 years ago that there would be a car that did not run on gasoline, that you could plug in at your house, was self-driving, self-parking, you'd probably wonder if I'd lost my marbles. Well, it's called Tesla. You all know that. Take a look at robotics, AI, and automation, and the impact that that's having globally on countless industries it's magnificent is what it is. Rudy Carson, who is a chap who sold his business Connexa to IBM for $1.3 billion in 2013, I believe, he gave a TED Talk where he talks about how jobs are getting decimated. And they're getting decimated because of the rate of change that's occurring. And it's not that that work is going away, the shape of work is changing. And so the skill and ability to stay current with what's occurring is interesting. I want to share with you a story, I'm going to read it to you, about a chap named Ron. I think you're going to like him. So in the mid-1950s, Ron was a teenager growing up in Brantford, Ontario. Ron was full of energy, had a mischievous way about him. Ron had dropped out of high school and had found a job with a local manufacturing company that produced paper tubing, the kind that's used to wrap paper towel and toilet paper on. The demand for the company's products were increasing, and there were opportunities to help the company with increasing demand. Ron had always been very bright and determined, but school just didn't seem to fit with his outlook, and he had continually been threatened by his school teachers, and so he left to find a way to make a living. Ron's first job was sweeping the sawdust that the saw machines would make every time they cut the tubing. While Ron didn't particularly enjoy the labor part of the work, he was fascinated by the whole production line, the machinery, and how each part was a component in the overall manufacturing process. Ron had never received any professional training, and he didn't even know what engineering was, but he was drawn to the orderly processes, and it excited him. Ron was not from a wealthy family, and as one of 5 kids, he had not experienced the finer things in life. When Ron wanted a bicycle as a kid, he wasn't able to purchase one. He built one. He had found an old frame in the garbage that still had the rear wheel on it. Ron spent weeks looking for another wheel he could use for the front tire, and he eventually found one. And although it was a different size, he was able to use it, and he now had a bicycle that, in theory, could work. He still didn't have the handlebars or pedals, so he managed to fashion pedals out of bolts and wood. An old car's steering wheel became the handlebars. Ron was bootstrapping, innovating, and creating solutions out of necessity. All skills that were going to help him create an amazing career over the next 43 years, all with one company. Ron swept sawdust and cleaned up the floors for months on end until an opportunity to fill in as an operator on a trimming machine came up. His job was now to cut through tubes and trim them into smaller pieces that the customers had ordered. Again, while the work he was performing wasn't all that enjoyable, the machinery fascinated him, and he began to think about how he could trim tubes faster, safer, and more efficiently. He performed the same repetitions over and over again as ideas started to form in his mind, and he tweaked things here and there so he'd be able to produce more. Ron began to design and create new machine components that would allow for the process of putting the tubing onto the machine quicker and more effectively. He repositioned the raw materials so they would be easier to access. The quantity and quality of his work outshone the rest of the machine operators. Soon, the shop supervisor took note and watched as he worked and began to study the new machine parts that he had made to aid in production. Eventually, the management team took notice as well, and Ron was put in charge of leading the team. Then the department, then eventually the entire manufacturing plant. The company began to train Ron, and he returned to school. Over the years, he received managerial training, financial training, manufacturing knowledge, sales experience, and he eventually became the general manager. Ron even had a few patents to his name for the parts he had designed. In the late 60s, Ron was asked to move from Brantford, same place Gretzky's from, by the way, to Vancouver, where he was to establish a brand new manufacturing plant and service customers on the West Coast. Well, he did that, and in fact, he opened a total of 5 plants in BC and Alberta, and at 63, he retired in 1994. Ron had spent over 40 years with one company and had risen from the most entry-level job to a senior executive, and by all accounts, had a very successful career. Ron, who has been happily retired for several years now, lives in Abbotsford. But he still loves to find new ways to do things and has a very active mind and is always looking for ways to improve whatever he does. Ron also met an amazing woman named Edith, who had me and my brother, Greg. Ron has been a fantastic teacher, father, for over 40 years. Now, what my dad did, and where we are today, it ain't your dad's career. Things are changing so incredibly quickly that spending one career in one company and working up the ranks, it's not that it's an impossibility, but the likelihood of that occurring over and over again isn't a reality for a lot of us. So when we talk about change, other things that are happening at a macro level, there's 4 and 5 generations in the workforce. That means that the folks that are just entering the workforce now in their 20s are working besides people who are in their 60s and 70s. It's the first time in history where that's been the case. That will continue to occur, and so the shape of the workforce will continue to change. So our ability to deal with those different groups of people is also going to become to the forefront. People are working longer, partially because they're becoming healthier. Congratulations, guys. But also, in some cases, because they need to. Let's move on. So I'll leave this section with this. If work itself is changing, then how we look at it, manage it, and plan for it also needs to change. Rule number 4 is you need a plan. But can you plan your career? I believe that there's fundamentals, there's frameworks and philosophies that we can employ that will allow us to create a plan. Not a rigid assembly instructions type plan, but a philosophy. So if you have a good plan, you can relax and then just work that plan. A plan allows for what I like to call career compound interest. It frees us up to invest in planning and maintenance activities and really important things like building relationships and an opportunity to do that at a place like today, at a conference like today. It gives us time to explore, test, try, and build knowledge and experience within our chosen path. And it alleviates career anxiety because you don't have to figure it all out. If you're going to be working for 30 or 40 years, you don't have to have all the answers right away.